When we think of absolute power, of the figure of a supreme leader whose word is law and whose will shapes the world, our minds, nourished by centuries of culture and art, invariably travel back in time to the majestic slopes of Mount Olympus. There, in the pantheon of the Greek gods, enthroned sits Zeus, the father of gods and men, the thunderer, the most powerful and complex representation of authority that Western civilization ever conceived. His image is that of a bearded patriarch with a severe and wise gaze, holding the scepter of command and the untamable symbol of his power, the lightning bolt, forged by the Cyclopes to assure his victory in the war against the Titans. It is easy to see in this figure the mere personification of a distant and unquestionable authority. However, to reduce Zeus to a simple celestial dictator is to ignore the profound richness of his myths and the timeless lessons they contain about the nature of command, the paradoxes of justice, and the hidden costs of absolute power. The story of Zeus is not just a tale of brute force. It is an archaic and intricate manual on the art of leadership, a mirror in which we can reflect on the challenges that any leader, whether of a nation, a company, or a community, inevitably faces. To truly understand the leadership of Zeus, it is imperative to go back to the beginning, to the context that shaped his government. Zeus did not inherit a peaceful throne. He conquered it through a meticulous and necessary rebellion against the previous generation, the Titans, led by his own father, Cronus. Cronus was a ruler driven by the paralyzing fear of being usurped, a prophecy that led him to devour his own children at birth. This act of pure tyranny, of the systematic elimination of those who could represent a future threat, defines a model of dysfunctional and unsustainable leadership. It is the archetype of the leader who, to preserve himself, destroys his own legacy and sows fear in his innermost circle. Zeus, saved by his mother Rhea, who tricked Cronus by giving him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to swallow, grew up far from his father, nurtured and protected. His ascent was not a stroke of luck, but the result of a careful strategy. He allied himself with marginal and powerful figures, such as the goddess Métis, Prudence, to give him the potion that would make Cronus regurgitate his siblings, and then freed the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, prisoners of his own father, gaining their eternal loyalty by giving them an opportunity that had been denied to them. This war, the Titanomachy, was more than a family battle. It was a cosmogonic revolution. Zeus represented a new order, a proposal of governance that, in theory, replaced Cronus's regime of arbitrary terror with a system based on laws, order, and alliances. This foundation is crucial. Zeus's authority is therefore legitimized not only by force, but by having overthrown an oppressive regime and by having established a new cosmic pact. He does not reign alone. After the victory, he divided the world with his brothers. Poseidon received the domain of the seas and Hades the underworld. Olympus becomes a kind of divine board of directors, where decisions are, in theory, debated. Zeus is the president, the primus inter pares, the first among equals, but not a solitary dictator. His leadership is, in its essence, a coalition leadership. He needs to keep his peers, powerful gods with their own agendas, satisfied, or at least sufficiently contained so as not to threaten the stability of his reign. This immediately introduces a fascinating complexity. The most powerful being in the universe is not entirely free. He is entangled in a web of obligations, alliances, debts of gratitude, and potential conflicts. His main tool for managing this balance of power is a combination of unquestionable authority when necessary and astute negotiation when possible. It is at this point that his most famous instrument of power, the lightning bolt, transcends its function as a weapon. The lightning bolt is the ultimate symbol of his executive authority. It is the final threat, the power of absolute veto, the demonstration of force that can silence any dissent among the gods. When Zeus brandishes his lightning bolt, the whole of Olympus trembles. It is the divine equivalent of a superpower's nuclear deterrent power. However, and here lies one of the first lessons, Zeus rarely uses it indiscriminately. Its effectiveness lies precisely in its latent threat, not in its constant use. A leader who needs to constantly resort to his maximum power is a leader who has already lost control. Zeus understands this instinctively. His leadership is exercised, most of the time, through persuasion, oratory, and a deep understanding of the psychology of his peers and subordinates. He is often portrayed presiding over assemblies, listening to arguments as he did during the Trojan War, weighing the pros and cons presented by gods supporting opposing sides, and making decisions that, although final, are informed by a deliberative process. This is the core of the art of his leadership, the ability to balance the demonstration of supreme force with the practice of a governance that, at least in appearance, is consultative and based on certain principles of order. One of the fundamental pillars of this new order is the concept of justice, personified in the goddess Themis, who, not by chance, was one of Zeus's first wives. Themis represents divine law, the natural order, the correct procedure. Her presence beside Zeus at the beginning of his reign symbolizes his commitment to governance through law and not through whim. She is the counselor who reminds him of traditions and the ethical limits of power. The children of Zeus and Themis are the Ori, the seasons, which bring order to time, and the Moirai, the fates, who personify destiny. This is profoundly significant. The union of sovereign power with natural law produces cosmic order and destiny itself. Zeus, therefore, is not a mere despot. He is the guarantor of a universal structure. His justice, however, is not our modern human justice, based on ideals of equality and compassion. It is a cosmic justice which prioritizes order, the status quo, and the maintenance of his power. It is a justice that can be ruthless. When Prometheus, the Titan benefactor of humanity, steals fire from the gods to give to men, Zeus does not punish him only for having disobeyed a direct order. He punishes him for having disturbed the established order, for having elevated humans to a level that, in his view, was not destined for them, and for having challenged the cosmic hierarchy. The punishment of Prometheus, being chained to a rock and having his liver devoured daily by an eagle, is an act of calculated brutality. It is a clear message to any other entity, divine or not, who dared to challenge his authority or the order he presided over. The leadership lesson here is somber, but realistic. Maintaining order and deterring insubordination can, at times, require a cruel and exemplary demonstration of force. It is the less palatable but undeniable side of sovereign power. However, Zeus's justice also has a protective side. He is the god of hospitality, *Xenia*, one of the most sacred pillars of Greek society. Violating the laws of hospitality was one of the gravest crimes, and Zeus, as Zeus Xenios, was its guardian. Stories like that of Baucis and Philemon, an elderly and poor couple who, unknowingly, welcomed Zeus and Hermes disguised as beggars and were rewarded with a joint death and the transformation of their bodies into intertwined trees, illustrate this aspect. Zeus rewards virtue and punishes the arrogance, *hubris*, of those who consider themselves above divine and human laws. This role of impartial judge and protector of the weak and social bonds is essential for his legitimacy. A leader who is only feared, but never loved or respected as a guardian of values, is a leader whose power is unstable. Zeus, in his idealization, aspires to this balance, to be feared by his enemies and transgressors, but to be seen as a protector and a just judge by those who follow the rules. Yet, it is precisely at this point that we find the deepest and most revealing fissure in Zeus's character: his chronic and systematic infidelity. This is not a mere character flaw or a colorful appendage to his myths. It is, perhaps, the key to understanding the paradoxical nature of absolute power and its intrinsic limitations. Zeus's betrayal is not just a conjugal betrayal of Hera. It is a betrayal of the very principles of order and law he supposedly represents. While he demands loyalty and obedience from others, his own appetites constantly lead him to violate the norms he established. This duplicity is the source of perpetual conflict on Olympus and the greatest vulnerability of his government. Hera, his wife and sister, the queen of the gods, is the personification of the anger and resentment generated by this contradiction. She is the guardian of marriage, an institution that should be sacred to the very king of the gods, and she finds herself constantly humiliated and disrespected. Her vengeance is directed not only or primarily at Zeus, against whom she has little real power, but rather at his lovers and, above all, the children resulting from these unions. Heracles, the greatest of Greek heroes, suffered throughout his life the relentless persecution of Hera because he was the living proof of her husband's infidelity. Why does the greatest of the gods, the architect of the cosmic order, behave in a way that constantly undermines that very order? The explanations are multiple and overlapping. Mythologically, it can be interpreted as a way for Zeus to assimilate and integrate into his pantheon older local deities and cults by marrying nymphs and mortals who represented regional traditions. It is a strategy of power expansion and consolidation. In a more psychological reading, the myths reveal the internal struggle between sovereign reason, represented by his leadership, and uncontrollable desires and impulses. Zeus is often portrayed as being a victim of the very desire he instills in mortals. He is simultaneously the legislator and the transgressor. This is a profoundly human and contemporary lesson about power, the corruption it can bring, not necessarily in the financial sense, but in the moral and ethical sense. The feeling of being above the rules, the conviction that one's own power justifies its own exceptions. In a modern leadership context, we can see echoes of this behavior in CEOs or political leaders whose professional successes are overshadowed by personal scandals or by a toxic corporate culture that they themselves foster, believing that the common rules do not apply to them. Zeus's betrayal is, therefore, the mythological manifestation of the old adage that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. His struggle is not against external enemies, but against the internal demons that his own power unleashes. Thus, the figure of Zeus that emerges from the first part of our analysis is not that of a monolithic god, but that of a complex ruler, whose leadership is a constant exercise in balancing strength and persuasion, justice and arbitrariness, the imposition of order and the satisfaction of his chaotic desires. He is a leader who understands the importance of law and alliance, but who often succumbs to the temptation to transgress it. His story serves as a warning and a guide. As a warning, it illustrates the dangers of hubris, even for the most powerful, and how a leader's personal weaknesses can become the greatest vulnerability of his system. As a guide, it shows that legitimate leadership is built not only on strength, but on the ability to overthrow tyrannies, establish a functional order, manage power balances, and act as a guardian of fundamental social values. In the second part, we will delve deeper into the consequences of his actions, the role of Hera as a force of internal opposition, and the ambiguous legacy that this paradoxical leadership left for humanity, exploring how these ancient myths continue to resonate powerfully and instructively in the leadership challenges we face today. If the first part of our exploration established the foundations of Zeus's leadership, his revolutionary ascent, the construction of an order based on law and force, and the fundamental fissure represented by his infidelities, the second part invites us to examine the consequences of those actions. It is in the unfolding of these consequences that the mythological narrative reaches its maximum depth, transforming from a simple tale of power into an intricate drama about responsibility, consequence, and the limits of authority itself. The reign of Zeus, far from being an era of unperturbed peace dictated by an infallible monarch, is a permanent whirlwind of crises generated, for the most part, by his own choices. And it is precisely in how he navigates these crises that the art of his leadership is truly put to the test. The most persistent and destabilizing element of his government is, without a doubt, his relationship with Hera. If Zeus personifies sovereign power in its most expansive and, at times, chaotic form, Hera personifies the reaction to that power. She is the force of established order, of the social contract, of fidelity, and of dynastic legitimacy. Her anger is not petty jealousy, but a cosmic fury in the face of the repeated violation of the principles that should sustain their joint reign. Hera is, in many ways, Zeus's irritated conscience, the living reminder that his actions have consequences that go beyond his immediate gratification. By pursuing Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children, such as Leto, mother of Apollo and Artemis, or Semele, mother of Dionysus, Hera is not merely seeking revenge. She is defending the position of her own son, Hephaestus, in some versions, and the integrity of the line of succession. Her struggle is a political struggle for the preservation of her status and her power within Olympus. This dynamic is deeply instructive. It shows that no leader, no matter how absolute, operates in a vacuum. There are always forces of containment, discontented allies, or figures with enough power to challenge his authority, even if indirectly. Hera rarely confronts Zeus directly with success. When she does, he can punish her severely, even suspending her in the sky with golden chains. But her constant and astute opposition forces him to be more calculating, to hide his affairs, and to manage the repercussions of his actions. Zeus's leadership is thus shaped by internal resistance. He is forced to spend significant political energy managing the conflict he himself generates, a phenomenon observable in any organization where the leader creates internal enemies through his behavior. This constant tension reaches its peak with the figure of Heracles, the hero par excellence of Greek mythology. The story of Heracles is, to a large extent, a story about the consequences of Zeus's infidelity and about how the supreme ruler deals with the fruits of his own mistakes. Heracles, whose name means the glory of Hera, is paradoxically the target of her eternal hatred. Hera's persecution leads him to commit a horrible crime in a fit of madness, killing his own wife and children. As atonement, he is forced to perform the 12 labors. Zeus, however, does not abandon his son. He allows the sufferings and ordeals to happen. He does not intervene to spare Heracles from Hera's fury. But ultimately, he supports his journey and grants him apotheosis, ascension to Olympus as a god. In this episode, we see Zeus's justice and mercy operating in a complex way. He does not erase the consequences of his own actions, the adultery that triggered Hera's wrath, nor the consequences of Heracles' acts, the murder. Instead, he allows the path of redemption through suffering and service to unfold. It is a lesson in leadership about the impossibility of simply erasing mistakes, whether one's own or those of one's protégés. A true leader, the myth suggests, must sometimes allow the process of growth through adversity to happen, offering his final support, but not an intervention that prevents the lesson from being learned. It is a form of indirect but powerful responsibility. Another divine son who illustrates a different aspect of his leadership is Athena, who was born already adult and armed from his own head, after he swallowed his first wife, Métis Prudence, fearing that she might bear a son who would surpass him. This act is one of the most revealing and disturbing of Zeus. On one hand, it is a repetition of the same paranoid fear that led his father, Cronus, to devour his children. It shows that, at the peak of power, the fear of being replaced is a constant. On the other hand, the result is unique. Instead of destroying the potential threat, he internalizes and transforms it. Athena becomes his favorite daughter, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just war. She is his closest counselor, an extension of his own strategic intelligence. In her, we see Zeus assimilating and co-opting the wisdom he feared, transforming a potential rival into a fundamental ally. It is an act of brilliant leadership, albeit born from fear, the ability to integrate complementary and even threatening qualities, making them part of the very apparatus of governance. Athena is the personification of reason of state, the voice of deliberation in his ear. However, Zeus's relationship with humanity is perhaps the field where his contradictions are most evident and where his leadership is most questionable. His attitude towards men is deeply ambivalent. On one hand, he is their creator in some versions, and their protector, the god of justice and hospitality. On the other, he views them with distrust and, at times, disdain. The myth of Pandora, the first woman, created by Zeus's order as a punishment for humanity after Prometheus's theft of fire, is the ultimate expression of this ambivalence. Pandora was endowed with all graces, but also with a box or jar that, when opened, released all the evils of the world, leaving only hope at the bottom. This act is not just revenge. It is a conscious leadership decision. Realizing that humans with fire and technology would become too powerful, Zeus decides to impose an eternal limit on them: suffering, disease, and death. It is a cosmic geopolitical decision. He establishes a ceiling for human development, ensuring that humanity would never become a real threat to the dominion of the gods. This is a dark facet of leadership, the management of rising rivals through the imposition of costs and limitations, ensuring one's own hegemony. It is a harsh lesson about divine realpolitik. This approach is consistent throughout the myths. During the Trojan War, Zeus is not particularly interested in the intrinsic justice of either side's cause. Instead, he allows the war to proceed according to fate, but also as a means of reducing the human population, which had become too numerous and noisy. Humans are, for him, pawns on a cosmic chessboard, and their suffering is an acceptable price for the maintenance of population order and his greater plan. However, even here, his individual justice can manifest. He protects certain heroes who are dear to him, like Achilles, or punishes acts of extreme impiety, such as the sacrilege of Ajax, the lesser against his priestess Cassandra. Once again, we see the balance. The leader who makes merciless macrostructural decisions for the stability of his system, but who can still intervene at a micro level to defend principles or favor allies. Zeus's legacy, therefore, is a legacy of paradoxes. He is the architect of a cosmic order more just than Cronus's regime of terror, a system that introduced concepts of law, fate, and justice into the world. He is a leader who understands the importance of alliances, strategic deterrence, and consultative governance. Yet, he is also a being whose personal failings, his infidelity, his arrogance, his fear of usurpation, are the source of incessant instability and suffering within his own realm and for humanity. His leadership is ultimately all too human, and it is precisely in this amplified humanity that his most valuable lessons for us reside. For a contemporary leader, the figure of Zeus offers a wealth of inspiration and caution. It inspires by demonstrating the importance of establishing a clear vision and a functional order after a period of chaos. It shows the value of force as a last resort, but of persuasion and strategic intelligence as primary tools of government. It teaches that a leader must be the guardian of the fundamental values of his community, be it justice, hospitality, or the keeping of one's word. However, it serves as a powerful caution against the corrosion of power. It reminds us that no leader is above the rules he imposes on others, and that personal weaknesses, when unchecked, can undermine moral authority and create powerful enemies. The story of Zeus is a warning against hubris, against the belief that success grants the right to transgression. Finally, Zeus inspires because his narrative is one of continuous evolution. Throughout the myths, he is not static. He learns from his mistakes, adapts to threats, and, despite his flaws, maintains his throne not only by force, but by a wisdom accumulated over the ages. His leadership is a process, not a final state. He personifies the eternal struggle between order and chaos, not as a remote dictator, but as an active and, at times, guilty participant in that struggle. When we study Zeus, we are not admiring a model of unattainable perfection. We are contemplating a mirror that reflects, in a grand and dramatic way, the very challenges, temptations, and responsibilities that accompany the possession of any form of power. And in that recognition, we can find the inspiration to lead with greater wisdom, justice, and, above all, with a humble awareness of our own limitations.